I want to just focus in on one club to explain how I think all this can go wrong. Norwich City. Norwich City have literally just fired their head coach, Liam Manning, having poached him from Bristol in the summer. He was at Bristol doing a good job, got them to the playoffs last year, and left Bristol to join Norwich City. Norwich City would be considered to be a better funded club than Bristol in terms of wage bill. Probably not by a lot, but by a bit, right? By enough, as you say, to make a significant difference. So if Manning's thinking, I want to become a Premier League manager, I want to go to a club that has the financial clout to get into those playoffs on a regular basis, to give myself a chance of taking a club up to the Premier League, which is probably the only chance I'm going to get of becoming a Premier League manager. That's why I'm going to Norwich, etc., etc. As it happens, he comes from there as well, but leave that to one side. Right. So Manning gets appointed, and 15 games later, Manning gets fired with Norwich second bottom of the table, only to Sheffield Wednesday, who've had a 12-point deduction. Right. Okay. So, oh, Liam Manning, what a terrible manager. Well, shocking, horrific, blah, blah. But is he? His two previous jobs at Bristol City and Oxford United had seen him outperform his budget, right? So has he suddenly become a bad manager? So I then look into Norwich City and find out that since they got relegated from the Premier League, in receipt of 3 years of parachute payments, or maybe it was 2 years, but anyway, receipt of considerable parachute payments, they got relegated in May 2022. So that's 3.5 years ago, since when they have had 6 managers, 5 permanent, 1 on a caretaker basis, right? Now, not long after they got relegated from the Premier League into the Championship, they appointed a technical director called Ben Napper. I don't know Ben Napper. I've got nothing against Ben Napper, and I'm very aware myself, painfully aware, of how difficult it can be to be put in the spotlight when you are in the football industry. And I don't even know what particular constraints that he's operating under, etc. But I'll make the following observations. Looking at Ben Napper's CV, he was not qualified to become a technical director. He had operated as the loans manager at Arsenal, and prior to that as a video analyst. Right now, the loans manager is a fairly lowly job at a big football club. Smaller football clubs don't even have them, but at a big football club, you might have 5 or 6 players, young players at any one time, who are due to go out on loan. Your job is to find them the right club to go to, and then to go and visit them whilst they're at those clubs and make sure that they're being looked after in the right way and their progress is being tracked, and that the people in the first team environment are aware of how those players are getting on in their loan spell. It's a necessary job. It's a good job, and I'm not knocking it at all. But the jump from being a loans director, and at this point Ben Napper was 35 years old, the jump from being a loans manager to being a technical director fundamentally misunderstands the role of the technical director and massively understates the level of experience required to be an effective technical director. So since then, Norwich have had 5 managers, and the one constant is Ben Napper, right? Who may well be a very proficient video analyst, a very proficient loans manager, but is turning out to not be a successful technical director. So if I'm the Norwich board and I'm watching this procession of managers and changes in style and different players coming in from lots of different directions and all this type of stuff, and big payoffs all the time, because if you're poaching Liam Manning from Bristol City, my guess is that probably Norwich would have had to put him on $1 million a year, and probably they would have had to pay him a year to a year and a half his salary to leave, but then you got all his staff, etc., etc. So probably the cost of the Manning mistake, if it is a mistake, and I slightly contest that probably he's entirely responsible for it, is probably going to be around about 2 to 3 million for Norwich, right? Which, when you think that Norwich might have total revenues of 30 million, is 10% of their entire revenues going on a managerial mistake. So you have to look behind these things. And even then, I would say it can't just be about Ben Napper. What about the board who appoints Ben Napper and oversees Ben Napper? What about the support staff that lie around that? I haven't had a look at Norwich's injury record, but what's their injury record been like over the last 18 months? Have they got the right performance department set up? What's their training? What are their training pitches like? What are their recovery protocols like? What's their recruitment like? Because it's highly unusual to have a technical director who had not himself worked as a head of recruitment before. Right? So there's just a whole bunch of stuff that's going on here. But when push comes to shove, the fans will say, we've lost 6 matches in a row at home, sack Liam Manning. Because it's them.
And can I say there, Charlie, I suppose this is where I've spoken before about supporters being infantilized by the ownership model of English football, which says that our clubs are run by wealthy people. Our job is to turn up and support the team, and we are fed information according to the club's dictates. When the club says we can know something, we can know something. We have no right to know what's going on inside the club, and we're not stakeholders other than as
We,
fortnightly
that's not true.
fortnightly fans.
That's not true.
Well,
Sorry, that's
let me
not true.
finish. Let me finish, and you can come back to me. And I think that as fans, therefore, the only person we see speaking about our club, whichever club we support, I'd say in general, is the head coach. The head coach will often say when things are going wrong, I take full responsibility for what's going wrong. And they are the person who, even if things are not ideal behind the scenes, they are the person who selects the players, who sets the training schedule, who will select the team and the formation. And of course, as my mum used to say, once they cross that white line, they can't tell them what to do. But nevertheless, they are responsible for quite a lot, and we as fans see them as being the face and the voice of the club. So if things are going wrong, I'd say there's a kind of natural connection between what we see and how we react.
Yes. Okay. First of all, fans are stakeholders. 100%. The majority of money that is being spent is the fans' money. So in my mind, fans are absolutely core stakeholders and deserve to be communicated with, right? Not just by the manager, but as is fairly apparent, when I'm the chief executive of the club, I myself communicate very regularly. Now, some fans appreciate that communication, and some certain clubs where they do appreciate that type of communication. At other clubs, they just don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear some suit, as they would call it, talking. All they're interested in is what the manager's got to say. So you can probably guess of my recent clubs which one falls into which bucket. But almost exactly this time last year, when Charlton was struggling a little bit, not horribly, but we were struggling a little bit. And I wouldn't say that there were exactly incessant calls to fire Nathan Jones, but it was definitely being aired fairly publicly, and occasionally at matches and this type of stuff. So I stepped out and did an interview with the local newspaper, a long form interview with the local newspaper, in large part explaining why we weren't going to do that. And I think that's important. Is you say, if we're not going to infantilize fans, we need to lay out what our thinking is and our reasoning is, and at least engage with the idea that some of the fans, and perhaps a greater proportion of the fan base than one might imagine, are going to be interested to hear it, and it's going to enable them to balance out their view on it more, and it's also going to perhaps spread the responsibility from just being the manager and to agree to players in a more general collective responsibility type of way. And
But
actually, it
I'd
was
say,
interesting.
Charlie, you are the exception. I mean, here you are talking on this podcast regularly and explaining the inner workings of a football club, which is hugely beneficial to supporters. But I would suggest that at most clubs, that does not happen. That when there is a time of crisis at a football club, the chairman, usually, sometimes the technical director, might step out and issue the dreaded vote of confidence. And we know that that is usually followed by dismissal. But people other than the head coach rarely offer what politicians might describe as a running commentary on the club. And perhaps they don't need to do that. But I would suggest that having some kind of regular communication from your technical director, from your chair, maybe once a month, just to kind of contextualize the way the club is and to make sure that fans understand that the head coach isn't the sole person responsible for performances, but maybe directors, maybe technical directors don't want to do that because the head coach is a convenient shield when things go wrong.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's done deliberately, but you're probably right in saying that there is an element of, you know, ducking for cover, and because the manager contractually has to go and speak, then effectively it enables other people in the organisation to not speak. But I do think that's somewhat cowardly. I do think you have to wear it a little bit more than that. But I just want to return to the importance of the behind the scenes appointments. It's almost exactly 5 years since Stuart Donald, Juan Sartori, and I appointed Christian Speakman to be technical director of Sunderland. Almost exactly 5 years. And subsequently Stuart Harvey to be the head of recruitment. During those 5 years, I think there have been 3 or 4 managers. One has left as he saw it to go promoted upwards. In case of Alex Neil, one or 2 others left for different reasons. There was sort of misstep with Michael Beale in the middle of it. So it's not that everyone gets everything right all the time. But fundamentally, those 5 years, having built a proper bedrock, have seen continuous progression. And really, I think that is how boards should be judged, which is the quality of the people and the work that gets done in these, what I would call permanent positions, acknowledging the fact that the head coach's position is probably, for good reasons or bad, going to change on average once every 2 years, something like that, right? So if you have the right technical director, if you have the right head of recruitment, if you have the right performance director, etc., then head coaches, almost regardless of whether they are geniuses or not, can look very good. Look at Brighton. So Brighton have been able to lose their head coach on a regular basis to be poached by other organisations. The new guy comes in and he immediately looks like he's just as good, if not better than the previous guy. Is that because he is just as good, if not better than the previous? No, it's because he's coming into such a strong setup where everything's being done in the right way and things are being done, thought through in a logical way. So I guess the long and the short of it is, because we need to get on to talk about Mary Earps, is that it's the only lever that you can pull in the short term that relieves some of the pressure that's building on the organisation. You can't change your players, and you can make changes to the backroom staff, but the effect of those won't be felt for quite some time, and fans won't necessarily understand it, will thank you for it, or whatever it might be in the short run. So these managerial changes quite often get made out of desperation to be seen to do something, and very often even the people making the decisions don't really believe that it is actually the right decision. They just know we've got to do something.